Welcome to the second lecture of week 11, where we're going to ask whether or not we trust any of the conclusions that we've drawn. So far in the last couple of lectures, we've looked at how we can get bits of information. Then, which is to say in the previous lecture before that, we looked at how we put these different little chunks of information together to come up with wider conclusions. And in this lecture, we're going to say, having come up with this wider conclusion, do we have any reason to believe, quick sanity check, do we have any reason to believe that this wider conclusion might possibly tell us anything about anything? So the first thing to notice is there's a significant difference between foundationalism and coherentism. With foundationalism, we start off from something which is undeniable or wouldn't be denied by any reasonable person, and we build up logically step by step from that, which means that a conclusion that we come up with, we know for certain, we are sure of this, and we can set here a very high bar for knowledge. We say, okay, anything which falls short of being properly certain is not knowledge. This is a hunch or a suspicion or a belief, but it's not knowing. Now, the problem that foundationalism has is while it looks good on the surface, and you start off with this sure foundation, and then you build up logically step by step to get something that's properly knowledge, it runs into problems when we try and say, well, what is this thing which is beyond dispute? Because these things which are beyond dispute become very few and far between. And within a given culture, there are all sorts of things that are beyond dispute. So as an Englishman, I understand that it is beyond dispute that tea is the best drink in the world. But it turns out there are places you can go where apparently otherwise reasonable people do not hold this view. And I can either write off a significant chunk of the world's population as demonstrably unreasonable, or I can say maybe this thing which I thought was beyond dispute turns out to not be on dispute. And if we find that these things which were at our base are not beyond dispute, then it turns out that we really actually, this stuff that we said was knowledge isn't knowledge. So we can't even begin building an edifice. And so we set this high bar for sure, certain knowledge, and we find that there is almost nothing that we can surely and certainly know. Now, what coherentism does is coherentism says, okay, we're going to string these ideas together, and as long as they're consistent, we're going to say that this counts as knowing something. I know that my pirate is a boy, and I have this string of things, and that kind of hangs together. Now, this isn't knowledge in a foundationalist sense. This isn't sure and certain definite knowledge. Within a coherentist system, when you say, I know this, what you mean is it makes sense within the context of all the other ideas that I have. But someone else can come with their own network of ideas and they can know completely different things. And so what we have here is, coherentists could say, well, we don't know anything, we just suspect it, or we believe it given the context of our ideas and so on and so forth. But in fact, what they do is they say, well, look, this high bar of knowledge where we certainly know something, we're never using the word know to mean that anyway, because we can't attain this. So we're just going to use the word knowledge for this kind of reasonable conjecture we have that seems to make sense. Now, this is similar to what we did previously with things like objectivity, where we said we have this very high bar for objectivity, which is completely useless because we never get to properly objective knowledge. So we're going to lower the bar, and we're going to say that as long as most people agree on it and they've discussed it and it's gone through this social process, then we're going to call that objective. And that means that we can still use the word objective, but it does lead to some odd conclusions about how objectivity works. And by pulling the same trick with knowledge, we're going to find exactly the same problem. We say, okay, we couldn't reach this high, certain, guaranteed knowledge, so we're just going to lower the bar, and we're going to call this thing that kind of seems to make sense in context knowledge. But it does then mean that you can know something even though that thing is not true. And you can know this is the case, and another person can know it's not the case. So these are odd contradictions that turn up with our new weakened use of the word knowledge. But even with those conclusions, we now press further and we realize that actually there are even more reasons why we may not utterly trust our conclusions. So I have a hamster. She's beautiful. Her name is Chubby Cheeks. She's gorgeous. She's a Rogowski hamster. If any of you know hamsters, they're beautiful and they're fast. That you can't see her feet in this picture. They are fast. Now I feed her every day. I bring her fresh water once a week. I clear out her bedding. I love her deeply. I would never hurt her. She is so gorgeous. Unfortunately, she does not know that, and she cannot know that. She is incapable of conceiving of the fact that I love her, that I look after her, and that I would not hurt her. Now, one consequence of this is that as soon as I go to give her food, she, if I'm lucky, runs right into the far back corner of the cage, and if I'm unlucky, shoots out the door and runs under the fridge. This is annoying, and I'd like her to understand that I'm not going to hurt her. I'm trying to feed her and look after her, but she doesn't understand, and she cannot understand. Now, when I say she can't understand, this is not because hamster brains are small. It's not because hamsters have low intelligence. It's that hamster brains are optimized to not understand that I'm looking after them. She draws the conclusion, I need to run away. Her brain goes through a mental process and comes to the conclusion, I need to run as fast as I can. Now, that conclusion is untrue. That conclusion does not represent reality because she needs to stay where she is and not run under the fridge. And yet, this is the conclusion she draws. So let's look at her conclusion and why she draws such an insane conclusion. Okay, imagine way back in evolutionary history, living in the desert plains of northern Africa, there are two groups of hamsters. Now, one group of hamster, through a quirk of evolution, has a brain which is optimized for truth seeking. It is optimized for generating conclusions which are reliable. And there is another group of hamsters which is optimized for being cautious. Now, the first group of hamsters sees a rock and they wander over it and they say, I wonder if this rock is edible. I wonder if it's interesting. Let's go and poke it and jump up and down on it. And they jump up and down and it does nothing. They say, maybe if we jump up and down harder, it will respond. There was a turtle that we jumped up and down on the other day, and that started off doing nothing and it looked like a rock. But then when we sort of poked on the inside, we found out that something interesting happened. So they jump up and down a bit harder on this rock. Now, the second group of hamsters looked at the turtle and they poked it very gingerly, and then the turtle poked its head out and they ran away as fast as they could. And then they came to the rock and they took one look at the rock. They thought this looks a bit like a turtle and they ran away without even poking it. Now, the group of hamsters goes out another day and they see an eagle. And they think, the first group thinks, I wonder if this eagle is interesting. I wonder what it can do. So they run towards this eagle in order to find out about it, and the eagle picks them up and eats them. The second group of hamsters takes one look at the eagle and says, I don't know if it's dangerous. I don't care if it's dangerous. It's bigger than me. I'm going to run away. The second group of hamsters has, within a few generations, thousands of babies because hamsters. And the first group of hamsters doesn't make it past generation 1. Now, in evolutionary terms, the first group of hamsters' brain was not helpful. It didn't ensure survival. In fact, it was directly detrimental to survival. The second group of hamsters' brains, they did ensure survival. Truth seeking in a hamster is not a good survival trait. Chubby Cheeks, my hamster, having descended from the second group of hamsters, does not have a category in her brain for big animal that I do not need to run away from. If you are bigger than her, the only thing she can think about you is, I had better run away as fast as I can. No amount of evidence, no amount of care or love or compassion or providing food or coming back day on day and not eating her will convince her that you don't want to eat her, because she doesn't have a mental box for that. Now, we understand that hamsters, if they were able to sort of sit outside themselves and self-reflect, might realize they shouldn't believe their conclusions. Fortunately, we humans are not like hamsters. We are smarter than hamsters, right? Our brains can do science. Our brains can do reason. We can contemplate the deep mysteries of the world. We can seek truth, and we can come up with the correct answers, and we can show, we can demonstrate that we can come up with the correct answers. We are better than hamsters. Unfortunately, let us assume for the second that, like hamsters, our brains arose from an evolutionary process. Somewhere back on the plains of Africa, there were two tribes. One tribe had a brain that, by whatever quirk, was truth-seeking, and the other tribe had a brain which, by whatever reason, was intent to keep them safe, even if it meant not telling them the truth about the world. We are almost certainly descended from the second tribe. If our brains arose from an evolutionary process, it would be tremendously surprising to find that our brains were optimized for representing to us the truth. So, do we really know our conclusions, having got our bits of information and put our bits of... My hamster gets bits of information, puts bits of information together and concludes, run! Do we know, having got our bits of information and put our bits of information together, that our conclusions are any better than a hamster's? Well, you go, look, you can see the truth for yourself. It is standing in front of you. And yet, I have no access to what my eyeballs say, as in my brain, my thinking, my consciousness, my bit of me that understands itself as me, has no direct access to what my eyeballs are seeing. All they do is they accept the messages that my brain provides. And my brain tells me that my brain is trustworthy. If you went into a court and there was a defendant who was his own character witness and there were no other character witnesses, would that seem strange? Yes, Your Honour, I'm a tremendously trustworthy person. I say so myself, and you can trust me because I am tremendously trustworthy. You wouldn't accept that. That is, I mean, circular logic is one thing, but that is a very, very small circle. I am trustworthy, believe me, I tell you. When we say we know the truth of what is before our eyes because we can see it, yes, we can see it, and our brain processes that information, serves up the conclusion to us and says, trust me, you saw it yourself. We didn't see it ourselves. Our brain has told us we did. And my hamster's brain has told me that it needs to run, told it that it needs to run. Okay, but reason. We have reason. I mean, cold, hard reason. You can't get around that. Except, why do we know we can't get round cold, hard reason? Who tells us we can't get round cold, hard reason? Well, blow me if it's not my own rationality. Blow me if it's not my own brain, which evolved over long periods of time to keep me alive. If I were able to get round cold, hard reason, and getting round cold, hard reason did not keep me alive, my brain would not tell me about it. My brain would do very, very sure to make sure I never knew. It would say, don't look over here. There's nothing to see. Keep looking that way. And if you see something bigger than you that looks like you want to eat, it wants to eat you, run. Naturalistic evolution provides a serious epistemic problem. If Richard Dawkins is right, and if our brains arose by a naturalistic process of natural selection, then we have reason to doubt everything we think we know, including the belief that Richard Dawkins' ideas about natural selection are true. Now, this isn't to single out biology as being problematic. Naturalistic physics and naturalistic chemistry don't fare any better. If the atoms in our brain are just atoms following rules, why would the rules that they are following lead to the production of an organ which would have anything to do with presenting pictures of the universe that are true? I can set up an AI computer system which follows rules and which writes wonderful fiction. There doesn't seem to be any necessary reason in the rules of physics and chemistry of atoms spinning around and doing what they do and following forces, why they should then arrange themselves to present us any way of presenting the truth of the universe. So there is little in biology which would favour our brains reliably presenting the truth to us. And there is nothing in naturalistic physics or chemistry which would suggest that our brains should be expected to reliably present truth. Okay. So, given that naturalistic science, if true, indicates that we have very little reason to believe anything our brains tell us, do we need to be skeptical? Is this the only position available to us? Do all possible conclusions look like that? Well, no, not quite. And interestingly, this is where religion comes to the rescue of science. So, hypothetically speaking, if our brains were designed for the purpose of truth-seeking, rather than for the purpose of making us survive, if our brains were designed for the purpose of truth-seeking, then we might expect them to be able to find the truth. If they were designed, for example, by a transcendent, loving God, who designed them for the purpose of ensuring that we were able to know him, to experience him, to know the universe around us, to get through life and see the truth and the wonder of the world. If that is how our brains arose, then we might expect that we can reliably know things about the universe around us. This is an interesting reversal of the way science and religion is usually viewed. Often people come at science and religion and say, okay, can science offer us any justification or reason for believing religion? But now what we're saying is science cannot even offer us a justification for believing science. Religion is able to offer us a reason for believing science. Does religion then just give us a blank check that we can say, yes, we can trust our minds? We're all good to go and do science again because religion says we can. Unfortunately, no, it's not quite that easy. First of all, different religions have different positions on this. The idea that I presented previously is something which comes from a Christian perspective, though other religions have very different views on the reliability of our senses. David might well talk a little bit more about that later. But even within Christianity, Christianity says, okay, our minds were created good in this sense, and yet humanity is now corrupted, and part of that corruption also involves our minds. So, for example, as a scientist, if there are two theories, there's the theory that I came up with, and there's the theory that my colleague came up with. Well, this one's the better theory, right? This one is flawless and inspired. This one, I can see lots of holes in this theory. There's all sorts of problems with it. Now, I can't see any holes in this theory at all. Is this because there are no holes, or is this because, well, I'm just wrapped up in myself and I think I'm awesome, and my own ego has blinded me to the faults of my theory? Right. Now, psychologists would call this cognitive dissonance. No, cognitive bias. Wrong word, sorry. Psychologists would call this cognitive bias. Christians would call this pride. I can't see the flaws in my own theory because I'm just proud of my own theory and I'm wrapped up in myself. And I can see all the flaws in my colleague's theory. He, of course, is a moron. He can't see what's staring him in the face. He can't see anything wrong with this, which clearly means he's stupid. And he thinks there's lots of problems with this, which clearly means he's very stupid. Now, as we then approach science, if we say, I understand from a religious point of view that my mind is to an extent reliable, and yet I also understand from a religious point of view that there are certain key blind spots which my mind will have. I also understand from a religious point of view what those blind spots are. Anything which makes me look good, I might want to treat with a pinch of salt. So I can offset pride, which blinds me to the truth, with humility, which might open my eyes to the fact that actually my colleague might have a point, and occasionally there might be a couple of problems with the thing that I suggested. So we do have problems trusting our conclusions, and yet we can, to an extent, start to see our way clear to saying, okay, can we sanity check what might otherwise be a problem with accepting our conclusions? Can we get a bit closer to thinking that our ideas might be reliable? So, to summarize then, for this section on epistemology, what we've said is okay, we can get ideas about the universe. We can use reason, we can use observation, and we can use revelation or faith. And these three ways of getting information about the universe are independent. They can be used separately. They can be used in conjunction. There are things that you can know by one or some in combination or by all three together. We can take these ideas and we can put them together. We can put them together building from the ground up. Or what's more likely, the way that people now tend to put ideas together is by building networks of ideas that are at least consistent. These networks of ideas are very useful, but they don't guarantee that we actually have the right answer. They just guarantee that things kind of hang together. But different people can have different ideas of what hangs together. And finally, we can look at these and say, does any of this seem even remotely trustworthy? And in a purely naturalistic sense, we might have reason to suspect that any of that at all has any connection with truth or reality. But when we step back from naturalism, we can find that within a religious perspective, we can rescue it from absolute futility while also having caution that we might not have it completely right, and also seeing a route towards at least making our ideas a little more reliable.